When I woke up, the house I had built with my own hands was gone. Those words echoed in my mind like a hammer against glass as I blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room. The beeping of the monitors beside me felt intrusive, almost accusatory, and the sterile smell of antiseptic made my stomach churn. I tried to lift my arm, but it felt heavy, foreign, as though my body belonged to someone else. The last thing I remembered was breakfast that morning, the smell of burnt toast, the thick aroma of coffee from the kitchen, my daughter chattering about her first day of the school play. And now, here I was, lying in a hospital bed, a minor surgery behind me, yet something felt off. It started subtly, the way life's betrayals often do. My mother-in-law Elaine had been around a lot more these past few months. At first, it seemed innocent. She always had a way of helping without being asked. She would bring casseroles for dinner, fuss over my kids, remind me of doctor's appointments I hadn't scheduled. She smiled that practiced, soft expression, like a gentle shadow hovering at the edge of our home. I should have noticed the tightness in her eyes, the way her fingers drummed on the countertops when she thought no one was looking. But love and trust are blind, and I was blind. Before all this, life had a rhythm I cherished. My husband, Mark, was attentive, if not always expressive. He would bring me coffee in the mornings and hold our youngest while I got ready for work. Our kids' laughter filled the rooms, bouncing off the cream-colored walls of the house we'd bought 10 years ago. Every nook, every corner held a memory. Scraped knees on the hallway rug, late-night story readings, birthday balloons tangled in the light fixture. Even the cracks in the kitchen tiles felt familiar, a quiet testament to a life we had carved together. It was a Tuesday morning when it all began. The alarm had gone off at 6:30, the smell of burnt toast pulling me from a restless sleep. My stomach had been upset for days, a dull ache that I ignored. But when it worsened, Mark insisted I see a doctor. I brushed off his worry with a small smile, a shrug of my shoulders, pretending I wasn't scared. It wasn't a serious issue, I told myself. Just routine. Yet, there was an undercurrent, a tiny unease that I couldn't shake. By 9 a.m., I was in the hospital gown, Mark holding my hand with that protective squeeze he always used when words failed. The nurses moved around me with a practiced efficiency, their voices polite but clipped. And then, the anesthesia took hold, a velvety darkness swallowing me whole. I awoke hours later, groggy and disoriented, to the sound of hushed voices outside my room. The soft clatter of shoes against linoleum and the whisper of papers being shuffled reached my ears. I squinted at the clock. 3:17 p.m. A nurse came in with a warm smile, but her expression faltered slightly when she noticed my gaze. "You'll feel a little weak," she said, adjusting my blanket. "But the surgery went fine." "You're lucky it was minor, thanks," I murmured, my voice rough. "Is Mark here?" The nurse hesitated. "He's not at the moment. He said he had to run some errands." I didn't think much of it. Mark often ran errands after hospital visits, fetching groceries or picking up medications. But then, I noticed the slip of paper left on the nightstand. It wasn't a prescription, not a discharge note, something about the house, a confirmation of transaction, typed neatly, stamped with an official seal. My heart lurched. I grabbed the paper with trembling hands, the edges damp with my sweat. My eyes skimmed the words. My stomach twisted into knots. Sold house. Power of attorney. My vision blurred. No, this couldn't be real. Not Elaine. Not her daughter Elaine. The soft, quiet woman who had always lingered at the edges of our lives, smiling as if she had no desire to disrupt anything. The woman who baked cookies for my children and complimented my cooking. Yet, here it was, in black and white. She had forged a power of attorney while I lay unconscious and sold our home. Every room I had walked through, every wall I had painted with my own hands, belonged to someone else now. And worse, our savings, the money we had painstakingly accumulated over the years, was gone. I remember curling up against the pillows, feeling the weight of betrayal pressing down on me like a physical force. How could someone who had raised my husband, who had been in my life for over a decade, commit such an act? I could hear the faint tick of the clock on the wall, each second stretching into eternity, each tick echoing the pounding of my heart. Mark returned later that evening, the familiar smell of his cologne failing to soothe the chaos inside me. His face was pale, his hands fumbling as he tried to reach for mine. "Sweetheart, I don't know how to say this," he started, his voice trembling. "The house." I cut him off, my voice barely a whisper but sharp enough to slice through the room. "Elaine, it was her. She sold it." Mark sank into the chair beside my bed, his head in his hands. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." The words felt hollow. They were useless. The damage had been done. I closed my eyes and let the tears fall, bitter and hot against my cheeks. My children's laughter, the smell of Sunday roasts, the quiet evenings by the fireplace all stolen, and worse, by someone I had trusted, someone I had let into my life without hesitation. The nurse returned with some water, placing it carefully on the tray beside me. I took a sip, the cold liquid doing nothing to quell the fire of anger and hurt inside. I realized then that this wasn't just about property or money. This was about trust, about boundaries, about a family dynamic that had been quietly poisoning our lives for years. Elaine had crossed a line I didn't even know existed. As I lay back, staring at the ceiling, a quiet resolve began to form. I would not let this go. Not for me, not for my children. This house had been more than walls and windows. It had been our life, and I would fight not recklessly, not violently but strategically with every ounce of strength left in me. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew one thing. Elaine had awakened a fire in me, one that would not be extinguished. And when I reclaimed what was ours, I would do it with dignity. I would do it with the power of truth and the justice it demanded. The first days after waking were a blur of disbelief and quiet fury. Mark tried to explain himself, to soothe me with words I didn't want to hear. I thought she was helping, he said, eyes wide, voice tight, but I had seen her help too many times to be fooled. The casseroles she brought, the advice she offered had always carried a weight, a hidden expectation. Now I understood what that weight meant. It meant control. It meant taking what wasn't hers. I called our lawyer, my voice shaking as I described the situation. Yes, she said after listening carefully. It seems she forged the power of attorney. This is fraud. We can challenge it, her calm, precise tone gave me a spark of hope in the suffocating fog of betrayal, but hope, I quickly realized, wouldn't erase the sharp, twisting ache in my chest. Not yet. Back at the hospital, my children arrived. My little girl, Emma, ran into my arms, her soft curls brushing my face. Mommy, are you okay? Where's our house? Her voice was small, quivering, and it nearly broke me. I held her close, inhaling the familiar scent of her hair, the faint trace of strawberry shampoo mixed with the day's playground dust. I forced a smile, because if I broke in front of her, I couldn't fight. We're going to fix everything, sweetheart. I promise. Her small hand in mine grounded me. I realized that my fight wasn't just about walls and furniture. It was about my children's sense of safety, about preserving the memories and life we had built together. When I returned home, what remained of it, I walked through the empty rooms, letting my fingers trace the backs of chairs, the kitchen counter, the edge of my daughter's bed. Everything smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, sterile and cold, stripped of the warmth that had always made this house a home. My heart clenched, but I allowed myself to notice details I had never seen before. The scuff on the hallway floor, the faint scratch on the doorframe where Emma had once leaned in for a hug, the subtle unevenness of the living room rug. They were reminders of life, of love, of ordinary days now stolen. Elaine had been careful. She knew I was incapacitated, that Mark would be busy juggling hospital visits and home matters. She had gone through the motions, meeting with lawyers, signing papers, leaving everything perfectly legal looking. I hated how meticulous she had been. Every step was calculated, every smile in front of my children, every gentle word to Mark, part of her performance. I spent that first night back at a friend's house, away from the scene of the crime, and let myself think. I didn't cry, not yet. I plotted, not revenge in the melodramatic sense, not vandalism or humiliation, but justice. I needed evidence, copies of documents, signatures, transaction records. I needed to understand the full scope of what she had done, and most importantly, I needed to keep my children shielded from despair. I started small. I visited the county records office, feigning casual interest while asking about property transfers in our neighborhood. The clerk, a quiet man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, handed me copies of documents. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. There it was, my signature look-alike, forged, a date, a new owner listed, and an amount I couldn't believe. The feeling was complicated, rage mixed with disbelief, and beneath it all, a cold, steady determination. I understood something essential that night. Elaine had underestimated me. She had assumed that I, the mother and wife she had watched grow weary from household work, the woman she thought would always forgive or forget, would crumble. But I wouldn't. I couldn't. Mark was frantic when I returned with the documents. How did you? He stammered, unable to meet my gaze. I didn't answer. Words weren't enough. Not yet. I needed strategy. We spent the evening drafting emails, calling the lawyers, and outlining the steps we needed to reclaim our property. Every phone call, every document, every recorded conversation was a brick in the wall I was building against her deceit. The children sensed the tension, of course. Emma asked questions I couldn't fully answer. Questions that made me ache in ways I hadn't anticipated. "Mommy, why did Grandma do this?" Her small voice, innocent and sharp, hit me harder than any legal brief or document ever could. I knelt beside her on the sofa, brushing back her hair. "Sometimes people make choices that hurt the people they love, honey, but we're going to make things right. We always have each other. And that's what matters." The first clue that something bigger was happening came when neighbors, who had witnessed the sale, whispered hints and rumors. "I saw Elaine signing papers with that lawyer," one of them said, her voice low, almost afraid. "She told me you were out of town. I didn't know it was your house." Another neighbor nodded, shaking her head. "I'm so sorry. I didn't realize she could do that." Hearing it from other people, realizing that her deception extended beyond just our family, made me furious, but it also clarified one thing. I had to act publicly, or the truth would remain buried. Elaine wasn't just stealing a home. She was rewriting the narrative, positioning herself as the benefactor in the eyes of everyone else. That narrative had to be dismantled. By the end of that week, I had compiled everything: copies of the forged power of attorney, the transaction documents, statements from witnesses. Each piece added weight to my case, both legally and emotionally. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, the room dimly lit by a single lamp, and feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and clarity. My hands hovered over the papers, fingers tracing the edges as if drawing strength from the ink itself. I whispered to myself, almost as a prayer, "This is ours, we will take it back," not with anger but with truth. And in that quiet moment, I made a promise, not just to myself but to my children, to Mark, and even in some strange way, to Elaine. She would not win. She had stolen our home, but she could not steal our lives, our memories, or the integrity we carried within us. The next morning, I woke before dawn, the air crisp and heavy with the smell of wet earth after rain. I dressed quietly, sipping coffee, with a tremor in my hand, and looked out at the street that once felt like a sanctuary. Soon, I would confront the situation head-on. I would speak to the lawyers, face Elaine, and ensure that the truth was undeniable. But for now, in that delicate morning light, I allowed myself one deep breath of calm. A storm was coming, yes, but I would be ready. The confrontation was inevitable, though I tried to steel myself for it. I kept replaying the moments in my mind, imagining her face, the same calm, controlled smile, the one that had haunted my thoughts these past days. I had spent hours preparing, rehearsing questions, collecting evidence, and anticipating excuses. Every document I held in my hand felt like a shield, every signed statement a sword. Elaine arrived at my house one afternoon, her presence as silent and deliberate as always. She wore a soft lavender cardigan, a scent of gardenia trailing behind her, and that same polite smile that had fooled everyone else for so long. My children were at school. Mark was out picking up more legal advice. It was just me, standing in the empty living room, papers spread across the dining table like a battlefield map. "I wanted to talk," she began, her voice smooth, rehearsed. "I think we need to come to some understanding about everything." I let her speak, letting the words settle into the heavy silence of the room. I could feel the tension coiling in my stomach. Each syllable she uttered a reminder of betrayal. When she finally paused, I leaned forward, my hands gripping the edges of the table. "Elaine," I said slowly, my voice calm but firm, "do you understand what you've done?" She tilted her head slightly, the picture of innocent confusion. I thought I was helping. The house, the money, it's complicated. You were in the hospital, and I didn't want your family to struggle." I laughed, a short, bitter sound that made her flinch slightly. "Helping? You sold our home, drained our savings, and lied to everyone. That's not helping. That's betrayal." Her eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second, but then the mask returned. "You're making this sound worse than it is. Mark, he could have." I cut her off. "Don't bring Mark into this. You made your choices, and now you will face the consequences." The tension in the room was suffocating. I could feel the adrenaline surging, my heart hammering against my ribs. Yet, underneath the anger, I forced myself to stay grounded. I didn't need to yell, didn't need to break things. The truth was on my side, and I would let it speak louder than any words of fury could. I laid out the evidence one by one, the forged power of attorney, the transaction documents, the witness statements. Her face shifted imperceptibly with each revelation, a flicker of fear beneath the carefully maintained calm. I could see the cracks forming in her forehead, and it gave me a quiet satisfaction, not revenge, but justice. You have no legal right to what you've done, I said, my voice steady. And now, you will return everything, the house, the money, and whatever else you thought you could take without consequence. Elaine opened her mouth, then closed it again. I could see the wheels turning, the calculation of her next move. But I had anticipated this. Every contingency, every excuse, every attempt to gaslight me had already been accounted for. When she finally spoke, it was soft, almost desperate. And if I don't, I met her gaze unwavering, then the law will decide, and so will everyone you thought you could fool. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, calls, and courtroom procedures. My lawyer was methodical, unyielding, guiding me step by step through the maze of bureaucracy. I spent long hours poring over documents, reliving every step of the betrayal, but each session strengthened me rather than weakening me. I realized that the act of reclaiming our home was also an act of reclaiming my own agency. Mark tried to support me, but I noticed how his shoulders slumped in quiet guilt. He had trusted his mother, had allowed her influence to seep into our lives without question. I forgave him slowly, understanding that his heart was with me, even if his judgment had faltered. We rebuilt our partnership in that tense, legal limbo. Our connection forged stronger through shared purpose. Emma and my youngest, Lucas, were mostly kept out of the proceedings, though they felt the undercurrent of tension in the home. Emma asked questions that pierced my heart. Mommy, why did Grandma do this? Did we do something wrong? I would kneel beside her, brushing her hair back gently, feeling the weight of responsibility. No, baby, Grandma made a choice that hurt us, but it's not our fault. We're going to fix it together, okay? There were moments of quiet reflection that reminded me of what truly mattered. Sitting in our local cafe with Mark, sipping coffee while the children were at school, I felt the sting of betrayal still linger, but it was softened by resolve. I wasn't just fighting for a house. I was fighting for our life, our memories, our sense of stability. The house was the symbol, but the fight was about dignity, integrity, and love. One day, the court date arrived. I remember walking into the courtroom, the polished wood, the murmurs of onlookers, the faint smell of leather and paper. Elaine sat on the other side, immaculate and composed, but the tension radiated from her in subtle ways, tight hands gripping her handbag, occasional shallow breaths. The proceedings were meticulous. Evidence was presented, witnesses recounted their observations, and the judge listened with patient attention. I stayed calm, letting each fact speak for itself. I avoided theatrics, focusing instead on the clarity of truth. And when the verdict came, it felt like sunlight piercing through a storm. The court ruled in our favor. The house was returned, the funds reimbursed, and Elaine was held accountable for her actions. But it wasn't just the legal victory that mattered. It was the restoration of trust within my own family. Mark and I, sitting side by side after the verdict, held hands with quiet relief. The children, though too young to understand all the intricacies, sensed the lifting of tension and smiled with an innocence untouched by the betrayal they had narrowly escaped. I walked through our home again after the court ruling. The walls smelled familiar. The floorboards creaked under my feet just as they always had. I ran my fingers along the windowsill where Emma loved to perch and watch the birds. I realized then that the house had never truly left us. It was the memories, the laughter, the love inside it that mattered, and nothing Elaine could do would ever take that away. The days that followed the court victory were quieter, but the echoes of betrayal still lingered. Elaine had been forced to return the house and the funds, yet she moved through our lives like a shadow we couldn't ignore. Mark and I agreed she should have limited contact with the children, but she still tried to insert herself in subtle ways: phone calls with excuses, visits just to see the kids. A smile that now felt like a challenge rather than warmth. I learned quickly that reclaiming the house wasn't the end of the story. Rebuilding trust and restoring normalcy was a slower, more deliberate process. The first night back in our home, I wandered from room to room, taking in the quiet, the familiar smells of our life slowly returning, the faint aroma of Emma's crayons, Lucas' favorite blanket folded neatly on the sofa. I ran my hands along the walls, remembered the dinners we had shared, the laughter echoing off these same ceilings. and realized that this home was more than walls and furniture. It was a repository of our family spirit. Mark tried to help me relax, but he was clearly weighed down by guilt. I should have seen it, he admitted one evening, his voice barely above a whisper. We sat in the living room, the golden light of the sunset spilling through the windows. I trusted her, and I didn't protect you. I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. We both underestimated her, yes. But we're here now. That matters more than the past. Our children were slowly coming back into the rhythm of their home. Emma laughed freely again, and Lucas fell asleep without the tension that had gripped him in the weeks after the betrayal. The normal sounds of family life, footsteps in the hallway, the clatter of dishes in the kitchen, the faint hum of a television in the background began to feel like safety again. I realized that the emotional battle wasn't just about property or money. It was about reclaiming our sense of home, our sense of belonging, and our identity as a family. Elaine didn't disappear completely. There were attempts at reconciliation, polite emails, offers to help in ways that now felt hollow. I responded cautiously, never allowing her words to dictate my emotions or control my actions. In those quiet moments, I reflected on forgiveness, not for her, but for myself. Carrying anger was exhausting, and while she had done something unforgivable, I had the power to determine how much she could affect my life. One afternoon, as I organized the living room, Emma asked me a question I wasn't prepared for. "Mommy, do you think Grandma is sorry?" Her wide eyes, innocent and earnest, cut through my defenses. I paused, kneeling beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Emma," I said slowly, "sometimes people do things that hurt the people they love, and they don't always realize the damage until it's too late. Whether she's sorry or not doesn't change how we live our lives. What matters is that we stay strong and care for each other." The lesson wasn't just for my children, it was for me. In the weeks that followed, I found myself calmer, more centered, and strangely grateful for the ordeal. It had forced me to confront manipulation, deceit, and betrayal head-on, and in doing so, I discovered a resilience I hadn't fully known. My anger transformed into clarity, my hurt into careful strength. I realized that I could protect my family without becoming bitter, that boundaries could be firm without being cruel, and that justice could be served without losing dignity. I started small rituals of healing. Evening walks with the children became sacred. We would talk about the day, about school, about dreams for the future, nothing heavy, just the rhythm of life reclaiming itself. I began journaling again, capturing my thoughts and emotions, watching the fear and pain dissolve into words I could control. Even cooking became therapeutic. Every meal I prepared felt like a quiet act of reclaiming my home, my family, and my sense of self. Mark and I grew closer in ways I hadn't anticipated. Shared trauma has a strange way of deepening connection. We learned to communicate more openly, to address grievances before they could fester, to trust each other in ways both practical and emotional. Our relationship was no longer just partnership, it was armor, a shield against the world's attempts to divide us. Yet, there were still moments when Elaine's shadow lingered. A phone call here, a rumor there, a whispered word from a neighbor, but each time, I felt the calm I hadn't known in weeks. I reminded myself her actions didn't define me. The home, the life, the memories, they were ours, and no one could take them from us again. One quiet morning, I stood at the window, watching the sun rise over our restored home. Emma sat on the couch, reading. Lucas played with blocks on the rug. The walls held the echoes of laughter, not betrayal. The air smelled faintly of bread baking, a comfort that felt almost sacred. I realized then that I had won something far greater than a legal victory. I had won back the sanctity of my family, the safety of my children, and the inner strength to face life's storms without fear. And in that moment, I whispered to myself, a soft reflection, life will test you in ways you cannot predict. People you trust may hurt you, but your strength is in how you rise afterward. Justice is not always immediate, but integrity endures. And love is what survives every betrayal. The weeks after reclaiming the house were a lesson in patience and perspective. Life returned to its ordinary rhythm, but with a sharper awareness of the fragility of trust. I noticed the little things: how Mark paused before answering calls from his mother, how Emma double-checked locks when she came home from school, how Lucas clung to me just a little longer in the evenings. The shadow of betrayal had passed, but its lessons lingered. Elaine, predictably, didn't vanish from our lives entirely. She made cautious attempts at re-entry, emails, calls, even a few polite visits that I allowed only under supervision. She presented herself as apologetic, her words carefully chosen. but the warmth I had once felt for her had been replaced by a cautious respect for boundaries. I responded politely, firmly, and always with the knowledge that our family's peace came before any superficial reconciliation. I found myself reflecting on the complexity of her motivations. It wasn't just greed or malice. There was a deep sense of entitlement, a belief that her role as mother-in-law granted her authority over my family. It was a bitter truth, but understanding it helped me depersonalize her actions. Her betrayal was about her insecurities, not about my worth as a wife, mother, or human being. This realization became a quiet balm to my anger, a way to see the situation without being consumed by it. One evening, Mark and I sat together on the back porch, the sky painted in shades of pink and orange. Emma asleep inside, Lucas playing quietly. He reached for my hand, his fingers warm against mine. "You handled everything," he said softly. "I was lost, but you guided us through it," I smiled, squeezing his hand. We guided each other, and I realized something important: I don't have to face betrayal alone. That's why we survived this. The sense of empowerment grew slowly but surely. I began taking small steps toward reclaiming my life beyond the home. I started volunteering at the local community center, helping women who faced domestic challenges. Each story I heard, each hand I held, reminded me that our struggles were not isolated. Betrayal, deceit, and fear were universal experiences, but so were resilience, courage, and redemption. Emma, too, began to understand the nuances of life and trust in her own small way. One afternoon, she looked up from her homework and said, "Mommy, I think I understand now. Sometimes people do bad things, but we can choose how we respond." Her words, simple yet profound, made my chest swell. She had witnessed betrayal, confusion, and fear, yet she had learned empathy, discernment, and strength. That was a victory beyond any court ruling. Mark and I worked on reinforcing family traditions that had faltered under the strain of betrayal. Sunday dinners returned, with laughter spilling into the hallways, filling spaces that had been hollowed out by tension. We baked cookies together, played board games, and slowly, deliberately, restored the warmth that Elaine had tried to manipulate and fracture. In parallel, I documented everything that had happened, not for revenge, but as a record of resilience. Journals filled with reflections, letters I never sent, and carefully organized legal documents became a testament to the journey we had endured. Each entry was a reminder: we were not victims of circumstance, but architects of our recovery. And then came the moment that crystallized everything. I received a letter from the court confirming that all financial and property restitution was finalized. Elaine would face legal consequences if she tried to interfere further. I held the letter in my hands, feeling the weight of victory, but more than that, the weight of closure. The house, our home, our life was truly ours again. I walked through the rooms that afternoon, sunlight streaming through the windows, illuminating the familiar patterns of our life. The chipped corner of the coffee table, where Lucas loved to stack blocks. The sticky handprints on the kitchen counter from Emma's late-night baking experiments. The faint scent of Mark's cologne lingering in his study. I realized that no money or legal document could replace these simple, irreplaceable fragments of our lives. Elaine had taken what she could, but she could never touch the essence of our family. Mark came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "You were incredible through all of this," he whispered. I leaned back into him, feeling the calm settle in my bones. "We were incredible," I corrected gently. Together, I thought about the lessons I had learned: the necessity of boundaries, the importance of vigilance, the power of calm resilience, and the irreplaceable value of family unity. Betrayal had been a harsh teacher, but it had also revealed our strength, our love, and our ability to face adversity without losing ourselves. And as I stood there, in the quiet of our reclaimed home, I realized something profound. Justice wasn't just about winning a court case or reclaiming property. Justice was about restoring balance, integrity, and dignity to our lives. Justice was about teaching my children the power of resilience and the importance of standing firm in the face of deception. Justice was about reclaiming the narrative of our own lives, rather than letting someone else write it for us. In that moment, I felt a deep sense of peace. The storm had passed, and though the memory of betrayal would never fully fade, it no longer controlled me. I was no longer the person who had been blindsided by Elaine's cunning. I was stronger, wiser, and more determined to protect the life I had built. I looked out the window at the garden, where Emma and Lucas would soon play again, their laughter carrying over the lawn. The sunlight glinted off the dewy grass, and I took a deep breath of the crisp afternoon air. Our home was alive once more, not just as a structure, but as a sanctuary, a testament to love, courage, and the resilience of family, and I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we could face them together. Betrayal might have tested us, but it had also taught us who we were, and that, I realized, was the most powerful lesson of all. Sitting on the porch that evening, the last light of the sun casting a soft glow across our garden, I reflected on everything that had happened: the betrayal, the legal battle, the sleepless nights, and the quiet moments of doubt. They had all left their mark. But more than scars, they left lessons. I thought about Elaine and her choices. I didn't feel vengeance anymore, only a quiet understanding that her actions were a reflection of her character, not mine. I realized that the more I obsessed over her motives or imagined her triumph, the less power I had over my own life. True strength, I learned, comes from focusing on what you can control: your reactions, your choices, and the love you protect within your family. Mark and I rebuilt not just our home, but our trust in each other. We learned to communicate openly, to question assumptions, and to protect our family without fear. Our children, too, had grown through this ordeal, learning lessons about resilience, boundaries, and forgiveness that no storybook could ever teach. I often tell people that betrayal feels like a storm breaking over your life, violent, unpredictable, and overwhelming. But after the storm passes, there is clarity. You see what truly matters, what cannot be stolen, and what is worth defending. For me, that was family. Our memories, our laughter, our love, these were untouchable. No forged document, no money, no act of deception could ever take that away. I also learned the importance of vigilance. Trust is essential in relationships, but blind trust can leave you vulnerable. Protecting yourself isn't about paranoia, it's about responsibility for yourself, your children, and your life's work. Elaine had underestimated me, assuming my love and kindness were weaknesses, but they became my strength. My compassion did not prevent justice, it guided it. If I were to offer one piece of advice to anyone who might face a similar betrayal, it would be this: do not allow anger to consume you, but do not ignore injustice either. Gather facts, seek guidance, and act with integrity. Stand firm in your dignity, and let truth, rather than spite, shape your actions. That is how you reclaim your power. As I looked at the house, I noticed small signs of life everywhere: the crayon drawings on the fridge, the faint dust of toys on the floor, the smell of the afternoon sun warming the curtains. Each of these small details reminded me why the fight was worth it. It wasn't about revenge. It was about preserving life, memory, and love. And in doing so, I had discovered a strength I didn't know I possessed. Now, when I pass by Elaine or hear whispers from neighbors, I don't feel fear or anger. I feel calm. I have protected my family, reclaimed our home, and safeguarded our memories. And that is a victory far greater than any court ruling or legal triumph. Would you have stood your ground as I did? Could you have faced someone who betrayed you so completely and still chosen dignity over rage? I want you to think about that. Life will test you in unexpected ways, and it's in those moments you discover who you truly are. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, gave you hope, or reminded you of the strength you carry within, please consider subscribing for more real-life stories like this. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced betrayal and reclaimed your life? I would love to hear your experiences. Remember, our lives are shaped not only by the storms that hit us but by the courage we muster to weather them. Trust in your strength, protect your family, and never forget that even after betrayal, love and resilience can restore everything that matters most.